Hello, everyone. This is James Bowen, and I'm running the Football Apex podcast with a guest. His name is Elliot, and he runs this Instagram page called 24 Football Italia. Elliot?
What's up? How are you doing tonight?
Doing great. And as always, I'm just looking forward to be able to talk about soccer, or, I like to call it in Europe, football. And, one of the themes of football actually is heritage and the history of it all. And one of the forgotten golden generations is that of Hungary.
Right.
So, like, the average, soccer fanatic nowadays, they hear the oldest they can go back is Pele. Anything before that, and Di Stefano, Puskas, they won't recognize.
Right.
And that's a real tragedy, in my opinion, because if
Yeah.
Puskas was a World Cup winner, it would change the whole dynamic. And if Di Stefano was a World Cup winner, that would honestly put him in the top 5 of many people's books. So, one thing about that golden generation that I didn't know, even up until today, was the fact that Hungary was more than capable of beating Germany. More so because they did so in the group stages of the 1954 World Cup.
Yep.
But there's a documentary on it called The Golden Team. I haven't watched it, but is there anything that from it that struck you and is very symbolic and emotionally attaching to you?
I mean, it's a lot just because there's so many stories and from that that team and everything like that, and it's the whole sort of what's going on in Hungary at the time. Once you watch that, I'll be able to give you some more context here. But I think that just the fact that Hungary at the time was going through, it was almost like a police state. It was a bad situation. Everything was sort of collapsing. It was very. It just was a tragic place to be at the time, and the fact that the football of Hungary was became the favorite thing of the people who are kind of in control of the country, I think was, incredibly, amazing. And it just shows how powerful football actually is. But obviously that's a big tournament. They almost won the World Cup in 1954, which they should have, or at least Hungary deserved an opportunity to do that because in the final against Germany, and we'll get into it as it goes on, there was a goal that Germany scored that wasn't allowed, that was allowed that shouldn't have been, and then Puskás scores in the last play of the game, and they basically counted it as offsides, which it wasn't. So there's a lot of big controversy around that, and just the whole tournament as a whole was just something different, just because Puskás wasn't at full health, and if that had been the case the whole tournament, there's no doubt in my mind that Hungary would have won the World Cup. And it's just one of those things. And like I said last week, there was a player on Germany who took it personal because Puskás says, "I'm going to dribble around you and embarrass you," that sort of thing, and injured him on purpose. And that puts Hungary in a difficult situation, because it was just and they had other great players. His running mate actually was the Golden Boot winner of that World Cup. I think he had 8 or 9
goals.
Was
it Coxes?
Yes. But it was an outrageous number of goals for one World Cup. Just what we see, because we see people winning it at 6 goals, at 4 goals, stuff like that. He had 9 goals or something like that. So just historically speaking, he's got more World Cup goals than most of, more than Messi and Ronaldo, for example. And he's not number one, because I know Klose was number one and R9 Ronaldo's up there, but he's certainly up there. He had a fantastic tournament, but I think just a little bit from the Hungarian point of view, they felt they were robbed, because if Puskás is fully healthy the entire time, it's a different way to, because obviously they would have a much better chance of the World Cup. And they had Puskás, they had Hidegkuchi, who I mentioned last week, who was basically the essence of that team, was his role basically as the center forward, or as they called it, the big number 9. And the reason he was so effective is the way it existed in the formation is he appeared to be hidden. So he could come through and counter basically out of nothing, which made him such a great player. And he's the player that gets lost in all this, because, you know, you got the big names, and then you got Hidegkuti, who didn't play for big teams. He played in Hungary, several different teams, but he never really played for Real Madrid or Barcelona, but he could have, which is why he's one of these legends that no one really thinks about just because of the whole thing. But it's just, and it's so highlighted because they in a 4-year span, they lost one game, and the only game they lost was the World Cup. Before they won the gold medal before that tournament. They had played England at Wembley. They played England once, beat them 6-1 or 6-3, crushed them, and then in reverse fixture they won 6-1 or something like that. And this is an England team that at the time is loaded, and then they beat a Czechoslovakia team, which was at the time one of the best teams in Europe, and they had gone through Italy, Romania, and all these other teams, and it was just one of those teams that we don't really think about in that same way, but internationally speaking, there's an argument that they're the best ever just because they went 4 years without winning. And then obviously horrible stuff happened after the World Cup, and a lot of the people on that team ended up fleeing the country, not coming back to Hungary for 20 years. So they just left. And that's when they went to Real Madrid and Barcelona, and then the other players went where they went. But it's incredibly good documentary. I think you'll really enjoy it when you see it. I think it was revolutionary. It was like Cruyff before Cruyff in some sense. And I'm not going to give them more credit than Cruyff because Cruyff reinvented everything. But a lot of the things that he did with Ajax and with Barcelona as a manager came from some of the stuff that was previously done by the golden team of Hungarian football. And that they're now attached to the historical part of that, but it's just an incredible story and a team that, maybe it needs to be taught more because a lot of people are ignorant to the fact that this was one of the greatest teams ever. There's two teams I feel like are totally ignored of their greatness, and it's Grande Torino and the golden team of Hungarian football because they were as good as anyone and just top to bottom. They revolutionized the game, and a lot of people thought, you think that football came from somewhere else, but the cold state of Hungary and that Eastern Europe was a big part of the true development and the growth of the game in that time. So it's a pretty incredible story.
So you mentioned Kocsis with 9 goals, and immediately who springs to mind is Jules Fontaine. 12 years later, in the 1966 World Cup, he scores 13 goals in 6 games as France are eliminated, I believe, in the semifinal or in some of the different formats that there were before.
Right.
So do you think that, by the way, Hungary have the record still to this day of the most World Cup goals in a single tournament? It's 21 goals. If you divide it by the number of games, 7, that's 3 goals per game. That's a hat trick per game divided on average.
So I know they beat Germany 6-3. They beat Korea 10-1. Those are just a few of the results that I remember in my head, but they were that team before that team existed. You know what I mean?
And my question to you is, what reason do you think is behind them being forgotten? Because you truly do ask anyone in and around. They only know one of their players, and it's Puskás.
Yeah.
And frankly, the younger generations only know Puskás because of the award awarded to the best goal of the year.
Yeah.
They probably would not know Puskás if not for that.
Yeah. My opinion, he's the greatest. Like we talked last week, I think Ronaldo's in the modern days the most gifted scorer of all time. But historically speaking, Puskás is the greatest goal scorer that the game has ever seen. And it's just, I think a big reason why we're not doesn't come up is because it was so long ago that it's not talked about in the same way. Because I'm sure after the Hungarian era, it was talked about in the 60s and 70s to follow that. But then Cruyff comes in the 70s, and then Milan comes in the 80s and 90s, and Barcelona, and all these teams that are part of the greatness going on. And after all that happens, I think you just kind of by accident kind of forget the greatness that came before because of the greatness that has most recently come. So people of this generation have to think all the way back to the 50s. There's just not a lot of information about that other than you seeking it. So that's why. every time I get the opportunity, I like to talk about, the Golden Team as well as Granite Torino, because 40s and 50s football, they were some of the greatest teams ever seen. And there's footage of the Golden Team. And if you just watch the highlights of England and Hungary, it's like embarrassing how
man versus boys.
Yes, and there's the famous Puskás goal they score at the end, where he controls the shot and just hits into the top corner. And before that, he does something with his foot, and they described the defender basically falling and sliding as if, in the documentary, one of the commentators says something about it's like a fire hydrant going to the wrong fire where there isn't one. So it's just like, and then he scores that goal, and Hidiguchi, Puskás was the star of that particular game. Hidiguchi had a hat trick in that game though. So that's another, I always like to mention that name because I posted on my Twitter a couple weeks ago that Nandor Hidiguchi is the greatest player you've never heard of. And a lot of people that communicated didn't know who he was. So I think it's always important to say his name and recognize him, because he's part of that too. It's one of the greatest attacking trios of all time. And if I remember correctly, it was like a 4-2-4 formation or something like that, and it was very attacking minded.
You're absolutely right. It was actually a 2-3-3-2. And so in the modern day, that's got the two holding midfielders. It's actually quite revolutionary. It's similar to the 3-5-2, but there's no sweeper. It's just a uniform defensive backline of three that becomes two sometimes. And so, frankly, this is a little bit of a tangent, but because you mentioned Cruyff and the Dutch football, which is it's funny, as a person that loves Spain and had to face Holland in the 2010 World Cup final, I couldn't help but admire and fall in love with that football. There's so many beautiful styles, Brazil, Holland. And so the Dutch, they've always had that holding mid that's elegant. And so they had Rijkaard in the AC Milan dynasty of the 3 Champions Leagues they won in a row. And they always put him in the hole. And even Ajax, during either his earlier or his latter stages, would fall into that hole. And so what happens when you take the center defensive mid of a 4-3-3 and you put him and hold him back, and then you push the fullbacks up, you get the 3-5-2.
Right, exactly.
Revolutionary. And with Cruyff, because of his total football, he always had that. He was very. He always pounded on the idea and concept of technique, where it's like even your defenders got to be technically gifted, and if not gifted, responsible enough to be able to distribute the ball to the players that were. And so I believe that's a philosophy that existed before Cruyff, but wasn't perfected, because to perfect it and beautify it makes it recognizable even to the people who don't acknowledge the greatness of the sport. Like, in my opinion, the reason that players are great is because they can make even the average, if not the hater of football, appreciate the beauty of the sport. And so when a person who knows nothing about football watches his Cruyff turn, or Lionel Messi dribble through players, they think, wow, this is amazing. This is beautiful. And although maybe not every player can do that, if anything, that's probably what makes these players the greatest of all time, because they can do what not other players can do.
Yeah, and another thing to mention about this is they're revolutionary in terms of style. They took a YM formation that was adopted by the English a couple of generations before them and adapted that. But this is the thing that is crazy about this Golden Team. They were Real Madrid and Barcelona before Real Madrid and Barcelona, because obviously in this modern day, Real Madrid and Barcelona are those teams that can go and get the best players they want and put them together and that sort of thing. So in Hungary, that's kind of what it was, because this jersey I'm wearing now is Budapest Honvéd, which is the club that Puskás and Kovács played for together for many years. So in this Golden Team, about 80 to 90% of the entire team was playing for one team. That's why the chemistry was so great. And the thing about that, it was an army team. So it was run, and they all had their roles and stuff like that. And when you're an army team, it's basically like the modern generation of like a buyout or a takeover, where a club it gets all this money. So during this era, the army team can basically get whatever players they want. So they had all the best Hungarian players playing on the same team. And if it wasn't this team, it was this team. So all the best players were coming from two two different teams, or mostly one, but one or two different teams. And so it was like Real Madrid or Barcelona, but only within your own country. And and a last thing I'll say about this is Puskás was a Gallic, whatever you call it. He was a commander or whatever in the Hungarian army. They called him the Galloping Major, which was his role with that team. So when he goes up against England, they disrespect them immediately because they're thinking to themselves, this guy's in the army. How's he going to come up and play us at Wembley and beat us? So it's just like one of those things. So it's like, it's revolutionary style, but also it was a little Real Madrid Barcelona because they couldn't get any player they want, but they could get any Hungarian player they want into those teams because it was run by the military, basically.
You couldn't be more right if you tried. You want to know why? Not only did Puskás go literally to Real Madrid, but the dynasty of Real Madrid winning the 5 Champions Leagues that pursued after the 1954 World Cup, 55 in reigns, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, I believe. At least when Gento won all those games. They had the dictatorship of Francisco Franco funding Real Madrid essentially to make them a total superpower.
Right.
And Puskás was the head of that because Real Madrid could get any player they really wanted. And so when you say they were Real Madrid and Barcelona before that, honestly, the metaphor is so perfect because it is what it is.
It's different though because it is Real Madrid Barcelona, but like it is very just narrowed in on Hungary. So it's not like they could get someone from Spain to come play for them. It was they just built this monster out of the Hungarian national team, and all of them were there together. And that's why they didn't lose a game for 4 years, and they lost one game. And the one game they lost, they shouldn't have lost. And this is the whole thing. I'm not a fan of the German national team for that specific reason, just because I felt like they robbed what should have been theirs. But Puskás was a different type of human. Also, they say he basically goes up to the German captain, shakes his hand, and in the documentary said there isn't a more dignified way to lose the World Cup. So it was just like, but I mean, their team was loaded, and there are names that I'm not even talking about right now that if you just evaluated them as what they were in that era, they're all all-time greats, but they're not talked about in the same way. That's why I always mention Hidiguchi, because you talk about all these great attacks. The best thing about Hungary, the way they played, is Hidiguchi wasn't like the way he operated in the formation. He became almost invisible, where he's by himself, which is why he scored so many goals and why Puskás and Kovac were able to feed off him and try to, do something. Because they were, again, as you said, they were the highest scoring team to ever play in the World Cup. So it's like it was the way they played. They figured it out. It's like they had the cheat code.
Not to mention, in those times, the technological advancements, I guess even in sporting gear or in equipment or even athletic ability, you could say, was not as good as it is today. So imagine putting a team like that in the modern era, as durable as these players were. You could just only imagine the amplification of these statistics. It's just a real shame. And I don't think time is the factor here. I think the matter is that they just didn't win the World Cup. There's a famous saying, actually, you'll never remember the runner-up, but you never forget the champion.
Exactly.
And so it's sad, in my opinion, that a country like Hungary does not have a World Cup winner, because I don't know the economic or socioeconomic factors and conditions that they were undergoing during that time, but it's something you cannot remove. You can't erase that star. You can't revoke it. You've won the World Cup.
No, yeah, it's like this. It's like this. It's like when people think of Argentina, they think of Maradona. When you think of Portugal, they think about Eusebio or Ronaldo. You think of different countries. There's always that person that represents that country. You think of Romania, you think of Hagi. So all of these different countries. When people when you're from Hungary and someone asks you, "Oh, you're from Hungary," and it's Puskás. It's like it clicks in their head immediately because Hungary is not a place that has all these monstrous stars like they would have in Spain and Portugal and some of these other countries. He was the guy there, and his impact proves based on the fact that when people think of Hungary, that's the first person they think of. Even people probably from that generation who's not a fan of football probably still associates Hungary with Puskás. So he's a beautiful player and someone who has scored almost as many goals as anybody really. He won 5 league titles with Honvéd, and that was and then went off to Real Madrid and did his thing, and even in the management side did his thing. So it's incredible, and he was, again, it's unfortunate that he's passed away, because I think he'd be invited to my table of people that I would like to have a discussion with.
More so, like when I think of the best forwards and you compare him to Eusebio, yes, numbers play a huge role, because what Eusebio and Puskás did was just crazy, even just on a superficial level.
I think the difference is Eusebio got pocketed in a World Cup semifinal by an English defender. I don't know the name. You can't find a defender that got the best of Puskás. Guy injured him. That doesn't really count, but that's the difference. And I think Eusebio is a great player too. But it's just, I think that's the difference. And they played in similar eras, but it's just like, it's not Messi-like, but there's no stopping that team and what they could do, because you have, at the time, probably the best player of that generation. And then you have 2 other players who, one is played with Barcelona and had over 300, 400 goals. And then you have Hidegkuti, who played just in Hungary, but in Hungary, he's like that guy because he stayed in Hungary the whole time. And it's just a hard thing to stop, because there's not really a way to do it. But I think Puskás, I've made my all-time 10 list in the past, but it's just sort of the first things that come to my head. You can even make an argument that he is, 5 and above. That's how good that he was. Because it's really difficult for me between Ronaldo and Puskás, and even Maradona. Those are the 3, like, when you're just ordering the way you sort of view it, it's difficult because of how great Puskás was. And we've seen, Ronaldo and Maradona do their thing, but of that generation, he was just a level above pretty much anybody. So it's just interesting.
If you had one goal to show what Puskás is all about, which would you suggest?
I like the fire hydrant goal against England, because it's not only, it's patience and power together, and finesse, because the guy slides, and as far as I know, he's still sliding. That's how bad he messed him up. But it's like, it's from the far post. He's like positioned. He's pretty close in, and then when you watch the ball, you can see, and this is old film, but you can see the power. Like, you could put Neuer, Buffon, and Casillas in that goal together. They still won't be able to do anything with it. So that's the one goal that I think of when I think of Puskás.
That reminds me of my dad's anecdotes. Dino Zoff, one of the greatest Italian goalkeepers of all time, had to face arguably the most powerful shot in human history from Carlos Alberto to make a 4-1 to Brazil in the 1970 World Cup final. Do you remember? Yeah. One of the most powerful shots. And so sometimes you just wonder to yourself, like, what would it take to stop that shot? It's superhuman. It just goes beyond that. And I guess sometimes it's just the right moment, like the right player at the right time, And I guess unfortunately for Hungary, what do you think went wrong for them in that World Cup final? What could have changed history?
The easy answer is the health of Puskás would have changed history. The struggle for me is, though, and again, I'm never going to not blame the referees for that game. I'm just not. I have Hungarian blood, so it's my nature to point out on the things that should have happened. But equally, it's not like Puskás just disappeared. He scored, I think, the first 2 goals, or one of the first 2 goals. I don't remember specifically, but they went up. They had a 2-0 lead, and then it became 2-2. And maybe if they had defended better or didn't focus, because obviously you're going to primarily focus on the attack, very aggressive attack, and the way they played that formation is the defenders attack too. Once they had that control, maybe they should have adjusted that way of playing, just because they came back so quickly. they had that 2-0 lead, and then it was 2-2, and then it was a game. If they adjust that position differently, maybe they don't score more goals, but maybe it's enough to sort of see off the German team, which was a great side, one of the best sides of that era also. So, again, you know, that they deserve to, because that was a great team. It's just, I feel like, you know, granted, if he's healthy, it's a different story, as it was shown in the group stage. But if that's not the case, just I would have tried to defensively shape a little bit and not focus so primarily on attacking, because you have a 2-0 lead, and even if you concede one, you're still in good control, and you can adjust your formation based on how the game is going. And I think they just caught him off guard.
What would you say? Do you think that they are the best pioneers of football? Like, do you think the way they played football is the earliest sign of elite football? Or do you think like in the 30s, 40s, and earlier 50s, that football was also great?
I think that they're the first, like you said, pioneers of football. But also, here's the interesting thing. The game is changing, like we've discussed in the past, in terms of offensive defenders. 5-10 years ago, the most goals a defender could get is 2 or something like that. Now we have left backs and right backs scoring 6-7 goals a season. They're primarily offensive pieces that I think should focus more on defending. But you see the impact of that style of football, because that team attacked from the back. All the left back, the right back, the center backs, everyone attacked. And nowadays you have guys like Theo Hernandez, who scores a lot of goals.
Sergio Ramos, just to name one.
Yeah, Sergio Ramos. The Atlanta right back, I can't think. Robert Gozin has scored 9 goals last year from that position. So that was in that era, everyone attacked, everyone. And now we're seeing that to change, and we're in this generation, and that was so long ago. But now the defenders of this era are doing the same thing. So that statement by itself shows that that's probably the most influential in terms of from a tactical standpoint of football than that Hungarian team, because everyone attacked.
I have the perfect analogy, and your understanding of football honestly just clicks for me. I know exactly what you're talking about, even when you haven't mentioned it.
Yeah.
There's this concept of the 1974 Dutch national team. It's called hunting for the ball. Have you ever seen when the full team presses for the ball?
Yeah, right.
I'll definitely show a clip of that. And I'm actually quite interested. Like at the end of this podcast, I want to do something where I use like a visual over us and we narrate. Like I'll explain what I mean.
Fun. Yeah.
Because when you explained that Puskás was a military leader, that honestly, I thought of Heung-min Son, but not quite. You know, I thought like there's so many political tensions in the sport that while they make it emotionally turbulent, they also make it quite interesting, because the narrative has much more on the line than we think it does.
Right. Because with that point, I'll let you finish. I just want to interject just real quick. They win that World Cup, the political standing of Hungary changes. It's not the same, because the sentiment is this was the favorite thing of the political leaders. They gave favoritism to the Hungarian teams. If they win the World Cup, then the war doesn't erupt in the same way. And like I said, so they beat Moscow, they beat the Soviet Union, and then they go to war for days. Puskás and all those guys leave the country. They don't come back for 30 years. So if they win the World Cup, the war changes and they win the World Cup. So that's a great point, because the capacity of football has it can change anything based on results and based on how invested a country or a club is into a certain team. Because you have that energy with Puskás, they make the World Cup, then they make the final, then they don't, and then that federation isn't as strong as it was, and it hasn't been that strong since. And this era, and we'll probably talk about him at some point. So since Puskás, between the years of the 50s and like 2018, there's been one superstar that has played for Hungary, or since Puskás, there's been nobody until this kid at Salzburg. I can't pronounce his name because it's got like a zillion letters, but it starts
Is
with
it
an
Orban?
S. No, it
No?
starts with an
Oh.
S. It's Shirzai or something. It's very hard to pronounce. I've tried it. But since that era, he's the only other resemblance of a star. And I don't know if that's because of what, but if they win the World Cup, I'm sure that's not the case because the whole dynamic changes based on the fact that they didn't win it.
So, what was I gonna ask?
Sorry about that.
No. I really like. You want to know what's funny? When you, how do I say it? Like when you have not enlightened. There's got to be a better word for that. When your words are so meaningful that they like stun and stupefy a person so that they don't know what to say. That's when you know what you've said is meaningful.
Yeah, that's why I try not to do that because sometimes someone will be saying something and then another idea will come in my head and I need to get my add to the conversation.
I like that because like when you're an active listener, if you're not listening, for example, if you're not an active listener and you were talking and I was like, wow. And then I changed the topic, it would go to show that what has been said is not meaningful. But when what you said has really struck me and I've got to consume it, that's when you know that what is said is really meaningful.
Right.
Right now, like my head is spinning with what you said about the Barcelona before it was Barcelona.
Yeah. The thing about that is I thought of that on the fly while I was just talking about it because then it clicked to my head. I'm like, boom.
But your understanding of football is so genuine that it actually matches. Like your premonition of what it should be is actually what it was. It's just like the way it is. So, for example, if I said, Brazilian football in the 1950s is so beautiful. If only they integrated samba, that'd be great. If I were saying that then, no one would know. But since I'm saying it now, and we know of the Ronaldo Nazario era, of the Socrates unfortunate era that they didn't win anything, of the 2002 World Cup winning squad. Now we truly know that method truly was applicable and effective and functional. And so when you say they were the culmination of talent in Hungary all in one, with some super team, that's what Real Madrid did when their dictatorship gave them that power. They beat Barcelona 11-1. So when you tell me that they beat a certain team, I think 10-1, there were teams more than capable of doing so when you put that kind of system into play, when you monopolize something. And it's insane because I don't, like I said before, know the socioeconomic conditions of Hungary to understand what they had available. Because if there were richer countries with better athletes, I guess better diets or resources, then you could make the case that if they did the same method, that they could be a better team.
Right. But the truth is, it's not. I don't think there's a point here where you can recreate what Hungary did because of the turmoil of the country at the time. So it's not like. It's like some of these great teams, Barcelona, Real Madrid, they're not having to deal with horrid stuff going on where, it's torture, kidnapping, and there's a line in the documentary where the guy says it was probably the worst place in Europe to be at that time because you didn't know if you were going to live or make it to the next day or not, just because of everything's going on. And because this is the way I see it. I think that part of it is the reason, not the reason, because Hidegkuti and Puskás and all these guys, they're incredible. And they would have been incredible if they weren't horrible stuff. But I think that plays into how successful they became. And you can see the ripple effect of them not winning it and how the country turned into something else. And then they unleashed war after the Soviet Union thing. And if they're not in the same situation, maybe they're not as good. So it's just, I think it is somewhat relatable. And I don't think the politics are the driving force. But for the leaders of Hungary, that team was important, which is why Hungary was able to stabilize for the years that they were winning, because they won the Central European Championships, they won the gold medal at the World Cup, and then they nearly won a World Cup. And people forget, before Puskás, they also made a World Cup final. So they made it 2 World Cup finals. They lost to Italy in 1938, and so. You can tell just based on the history of that, and obviously they became much bigger when Puskás arrived. But there were other contributing factors in the fact that the country was in such a horrible place at that time. Is why the people claimed held on to the hopes of Puskás and the Hungarian golden team.
Do you think that the dismantlement of the Hungarian national team can be equated to what happened to Brazil after the Maracanazo in 1950 when they lost to Uruguay? Because there is a myth, urban legend, that people committed suicide at the very stadium because of the depression that struck Brazil, as a result of losing the World Cup on home soil to an enemy, they say. Because that was what the narrative was back then, that Uruguay is the enemy.
Yeah, because in Pele's book, he says that everyone thought Brazil was going to win. There was no doubt of any kind that the Uruguay had a chance. And then they win, and then people they talked about how he would be at this guy who scored the winning goal would be at the grocery store or something, and he's like, that's the guy that ruined Brazil, or that's the guy who robbed us of a World Cup, and that's the guy who ruined Brazil. That's stuff like that. So I think it can be somewhat related to that.
Let's see. I think one final point that would wrap it up really well, just because I really want to do the like voiceover, the narration.
Yeah.
Would be, is there a way to, in Spanish is disimular, like subtly siphon from the greatness of a team and integrate it into another team and make it effective in a different era? And what I mean by that is, like, if you were to reuse old tactics that were really effective in a new generation, would they be applicable? Like, do you think that the Hungarian national team system of the 2-3-3-2 could work today?
I mean, it's hard to say, because football is just in a different place it is now than it was then. That's the one team I think is untouched. I don't think there's a way to recreate that at all. I think there's one way, and this is no manager would ever do this, because this is not the way it works. But the most similar team I can think of that can not rival the Hungarian team, but they're similar, is Grande Torino team. The one, won those championships, the war happened, and they won the other championships, and then, they died and all that stuff. A tragic story. But that team had the highest goal scoring in the history of the league, 125 goals in a season and stuff like that. But that's not why I compare the Golden Team and Grande Torino. The reason they are comparable is because of this. The Grande Torino team was built. So let me put it this way. If you built the team like Grande Torino using the formation of the Hungarian Golden Team, then it would work. But it's hard because Grande Torino was built based on the director of football, I'm blanking on his name, Novo, who was the guy who constructed Grande Torino. Not the guy who coached, but he hired this person, who one of the guys was like he had run a clothing store. Another guy was this. So he was hiring a team of people who would offer different types of qualities beyond the football side. And then he signed specific players to fit his system. So this is the problem. In modern football, if a big team's available, you have the money, you're buying the best player. You're not buying a player that fits the system. So if you're, I'm going to put this in an example. Barcelona signed Antoine Griezmann because he was the best striker available. He doesn't fit the Barcelona way. He doesn't stand for what Barcelona stands for, and he doesn't fit with the team that was constructed. Same goes for Real Madrid signing Jovic from Frankfurt. He doesn't fit Real Madrid in any aspect. So when you're in a place where you're buying players that don't fit the team, and you're just buying the best players, then you couldn't do that. But if a manager was willing to sign specific players for his system and not for the greatness of the team, then you could possibly use the Grande Torino method with the formations of the Golden Team to potentially try to recreate it. But it'd be very difficult because it couldn't be one guy or two guys. All 11 would have to fit your formation and fit what that team does. So if you have, if your style of football is to play out of the back, you can't have one defender or a goalkeeper that doesn't do that. If you have a team that's pushing forward you need all your players in those positions that are push forward type of defenders rather than defensive. So you would have to line up, and it would be interesting to try to see, like, if we could just, and I think we should do this at one point, take the Hungarian formation from and use the Torino method to try to fit players into one team that could work with the golden generation of Hungary. But that's the only way it works, is if you use Grande Torino's method with the formations of Hungarian national team, and you fill them with players who fit that system, not just the best players or the fastest or anything like that. They would have to be, they would just have to fit together, and that's the only way it works. So, long story short, no, because they're not going to do that, and that's not the way transfer business works anymore. But it is possible if all of those things align, but it would be very difficult to recreate, because without people that fit the system, it's not working.
Elliot, I definitely want to keep talking about this because I haven't watched the documentary yet.
Yeah.
But I would definitely be willing to talk about it over the weekend. And I feel like this has definitely been a good podcast, even if it was brief.
Yeah.
But I will try the voiceover thing over this broadcast.
Yeah.
Not broadcast, podcast. And I'll show you what it looks like afterwards.
Okay.
But like in a few minutes, I gotta do some other assignment, and
it
truly was a pleasure catching up to you, bro. And you gonna be able to upload this?
Yeah, I'm gonna upload it.
Perfect.
I'll call it like what's that called? Golden Team Part 1.
Yeah. Okay. You text me about that. I really do have to get going though. But
okay.
I will catch you though, and I will text you, and I'll upload on my story. Okay, bro?
All right. Thank you guys for listening. See you guys later.
It's been a pleasure. Catch you guys.